Sadly, VR doesn't quite have mainstream adoption yet. Despite the fact that VR is an amazing experience, it just hasn't really caught on yet. Although VR's popularity is thankfully rapidly increasing, only about 2% of Steam users have a VR headset connected. In this series of videos, I want to talk about why exactly it is that VR hasn't caught on yet. And because I love VR so much and want it to do better, I also want to talk a little bit about how it could do better. And we're going to be talking about that right now on the Linux Lounge. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining Odysee, the freedom-respecting alternative to YouTube. Links in the description. In today's video, I want to talk about one of the biggest reasons why I think that VR hasn't taken off just yet, and that's a lack of games. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of fantastic games for VR. Games like Half-Life Alyx, Beat Saber, and others make VR well worth it on their own, in my opinion. But when it comes to selling people on a piece of equipment that costs, in some cases, nearly $1,000, and that's not even factoring in the expensive gaming PC that you'll need to run the VR headset, then you really do need some seriously big name titles to win people over. And sadly, those games just don't exist yet. There really aren't that many headset selling games, in my opinion. Think about it this way. If you don't already have a high-end gaming PC, your best option for VR right now is probably a Quest 2, which costs £300 new and not much less than that used. For that kind of money, you could buy a used PS4 or Xbox One and a pretty decent library of games. In fact, for that kind of money, you wouldn't even have to spend that much more to get a PS5, assuming that you can find one at its intended price. Now, I do think that VR is well worth the money, but if you can only afford one or the other, like most people I would imagine, VR just doesn't really have enough system-selling games to choose it over a traditional console or gaming PC. Although, with that said, I do think that VR is a very good value proposition if you already have a high-end gaming PC and are willing to buy a headset used. But, unfortunately, not many people do have a high-end enough gaming PC. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are probably thinking at this point that I am completely wrong. After all, there are a lot of big name games for VR, and well, that's true. We do have games like Skyrim VR, Fallout 4 VR, and several other big name VR games, as well as several smaller name titles. But I think that the problem with most games in VR at the moment is they fall into one of two problems. The game was either very clearly not designed for VR, or it's just too short and without much substance. First, let's talk about the problem of games being not very well optimized for VR. There's really two reasons why this could happen. The first of which is that VR is just fairly new technology, and developers aren't quite sure how to work with it yet, which is totally understandable, and I wouldn't blame developers for that. The second problem is more nefarious though, and that problem is developers releasing lazy cash grabs and sloppy VR ports. The one that comes to mind for me that I've been playing through recently is Fallout 4 VR. As fun as it is to explore the waste in VR, it's pretty apparent that Fallout 4 was never designed to be played this way. The controls are really janky in VR, and it really does just feel like playing the game with the screen closer to my face, since there isn't really that much interaction with the environment that couldn't be done on a flat screen. The game also suffers from performance issues and annoying things like that. I can't help but feel like games like Fallout 4 VR are just made for the sake of having a big name title in VR, as opposed to making an actual worthwhile VR game. And the sad truth is that when companies make games like this, it puts people off VR. The other problem with some VR games is that they can be terribly short and or not very dense with content. A lot of VR games just end up being quite short experiences, and while that's totally fine and I actually enjoy a lot of those experiences, they're not really enough to sell headsets, I don't think, especially if people only get an hour or two out of the game. Additionally, a lot of VR games can be very sandboxy, which is completely fine, and a lot of these games are actually really fun. But at the same time, a lot of these games can be quite expensive too. Even if you're only making a short VR game, it still does cost a lot to develop. Consequently, VR does end up being quite an expensive hobby a lot of the time for not a lot of content, which means that only enthusiasts like myself will consider it worth it. Although I do have to say, yes, it is very much worth it. Now, I know that I have just spent however long saying that VR doesn't have enough games, and while I think for the time being it is true that VR doesn't have enough headset selling games, I don't think that that'll be the case for much longer, since Half-Life Alyx has recently set the standard for VR games. It's an incredible experience which is every bit as good as a non-VR AAA game, while still also being of a decent length and absolutely masterfully designed for VR. Apparently Boneworks and games like that are also the same way, but I haven't had the chance to try those just yet. If games like Half-Life Alyx can pull this off, then it's clear that more games can do this too. And if there are more compelling games like Half-Life Alyx, then surely VR will become more and more appealing, as it already is doing. So with that said, that's it for today's video. What did you think of it? I'm sure that this is quite a controversial video, but you are always free to let me know what you thought in the comment section below. But with all that said, that's it for today's video. I will see you in the next one, and I thank you for watching.